So this was very exciting that we were able to have Stephon Alexander come and be our afternoon keynote. And I'll tell you a little bit about Stephon, and then he can tell you a bit more if he so chooses. But he's a physicist at Brown University. He actually undergrad went to Haverford and actually ran into a number of his old buddies here. But he's also now the current and acting president of the National Society of Black Physicists. So let's bring up Stephon Alexander. He's the writer of an important book called The Jazz of Physics.
Thank you, Brother Bruce and Brother Clayton. Let's say that I'm deeply humbled, and the reason why I'm humbled is to see this in action, to see this renaissance. You call it, the third Harlem Renaissance, basically. You heard about the first and the second. I brought this up here deliberately. This is actually you all know what this is, right? But this little thing here, there was a keyboard, an early version of this when I grew up in the Bronx, New York, right uptown. I am the proud product of the New York City public school system, okay? PS 16, junior high school 142 in the inner wall projects. Dr. H.W. Brindle, who's from Harlem, came and was my middle school principal. I'll begin with a little story about that. My school was in the Eden Wall Projects. It was a kind of a, public housing place, and I was, my family, we lived in a neighborhood across the way, but I was still pegged to go to that school. You have to pardon me, I just flew in from Switzerland. I was at the Large Hadron Collider yesterday, and I flew in late last night to make this talk. So I'm a little bit jet lagged, so my brain is not working as well as I would like it to. But anyway, the story begins that basically I'm 13 years old, and this is, was known to be one of the toughest middle schools in New York City. And Dr. Brindle came in to make a difference. His story was that he was pegged to win the Olympics in the 400-meter dash, and he was training at West Point, and somebody shot him in the leg. And he joined Martin Luther King's movement, and he was, I think, a professor at City College in English and became our principal. And he wanted to turn our school around. And anyway, one day we had this assembly where we all had to dress up, wear black pants and white shirts. And this guy was a towering figure, and he would intimidate you, so you had to show up with your outfit on. And he would have visitors come in. And one day, this guy came in with an orange jumpsuit, and he was in his 60s, and he had a boombox playing music, playing hip-hop beats. This is in the 80s, like 85, when hip-hop was only still in the Bronx. I know, haters from Brooklyn. And he's playing the beat, and everybody starts dancing to the beat, us kids, and the guy and we thought he was like some kind of an entertainer, like a clown, wearing an orange suit. It turned out that Dr. Brindle brought Fred Gregory, one of the first African-American astronauts, to our middle school. And he sat down and he said, "You guys like this beat, don't you?" He's like, "Yeah, we love this beat." He said, "But do you know how to make this radio?" He said, "That's true power." And going back to what the gentleman was saying earlier on about role models, it was when he came, it wasn't like somebody separate from us or somebody that made it and we could never. It was like he was like one of us. He spoke like us. He was from D.C. He had a little bit of a D.C. accent. It's like, go play that go-go music, man. And that was very important for me. And what I would become, which was to never forget and always appreciate and value who I am, where I come from. And this is why I'm so proud to be a part of this. So let me now begin with my official kind of talk. This is technology. And that Casio CZ100, there was made a beat back in the 80s that became basically the beat that made hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's an example of innovation from the inner city. So where's my talk? So let's begin. This is my book, The Jazz of Physics. The book basically explores the connection, especially between, basically I'm reframing jazz music as a science, and I connect that, especially in the eyes of John Coltrane, and I connect that to the science of Albert Einstein. And the book is selling most and best with teenagers, actually. All right, so I want to begin with a quote from Albert Einstein. And after this quote, I'm going to ask you two questions. So could somebody read this quote loudly for the audience? I'm going to ask, yes, the gentleman there, you have to speak very loudly and read it out. Ma'am, sorry, I can't see, the light is all went away. What's your name? Lil Mickelson. So at the end of the day, this is about the question. Okay, so we're here at this Silicon Harlem, 6th annual anniversary. We're talking about technology, for example, the future of technology and currently and how. So I have a question for you. What is the question? Feel free to speak out loud if you have the answer to that question.
How do we get folks to embrace creation?
Beautiful.
And understanding how systems work so they can solve the problem of the future, not just the one facing them right now.
Could you say that one more time? Say it loudly. In fact, I resonate with that.
Okay. I forgot the beginning of it now. How to get folks to learn how to create things and to think in terms of systems so that they solve the problems of the future and not just the ones sitting right in front of them right now.
Okay, so thank you. Give it up for the gentleman. And so I'll leave that question. Here's my question for you. What is technology? Okay, very good. That's actually a good working definition. And if you go online, for example, and go into Google, it'll say basically, it is a use of scientific knowledge, okay, for practical applications. But then we can then go and question, okay, what is science? We have another physicist in the audience, and I love the fact that he's here because everything I say, he's gonna, I think we're gonna make a bet for a bottle of wine that if I say something wrong, you get the bottle of wine, okay? The question is, if I say everything right, what do you get? What do I get? All right. So we're going to delve into this. And what I'm now going to show you is actually it's not that linear. The interplay between science and technology, right, is not linear. And I'm going to show you a couple of slides to show you what I mean, to demonstrate that. So it begins with, for example, did physicists playing with wires and magnets over 100 years ago know that it would lead to cell phones? Yes or no? Huh? No. James Clerk Maxwell was simply trying to understand magnetic induction, right? If you put a magnet next to electric wire, why electric current flows. And of course, these things became known as the theory of electromagnetism. And when Marconi sent the first signal from Italy to Canada, he did not know it would become the radio. Okay, what about, did Werner Heisenberg, conjuring up quantum uncertainty, think it would contribute to the computer? All right, so the Nobel Prize was given for something called a transistor, which is a quantum device, and every single computer you use, every single bit of modern technology we have is based on quantum uncertainty. It was a principle that him and Albert Einstein debated for over 40 years that had to do with, more to do with crazy philosophical ideas in physics. Did Einstein, trying to understand the nature of space and time, curved space, black holes, gravitational waves, know they would lead to GPS? Okay, we're getting warm now. Did the curiosity of this, this outdated Princeton professor to try to understand the color of butterfly wings? He was a laughingstock of his colleagues. You want to understand butterfly wings? Go watch a Disney movie, Go hang with the kids. Did he know that it would lead to a breakthrough in blood cancer? No. Curiosity-driven science. Did DJ Kool Herc and Grandmaster Flash know that innovating a turntable is an instrument? I misspelled innovating, that's why I was a physics major. Okay? You know, I'm not too good at, well, I've been working on it. A turntable as an instrument would reorient the electronic instrument industry. Did they know that? No, my dad was a cab driver, so I know they didn't know that.
Hello, my name is Origin
What's
Igirones.
going on here? Oh, I think Cool Herc is probably mad at me. Okay. So the lesson I want you to walk away with is that curiosity, this is important because it's actually important for why I think Silicon Harlem is uniquely positioned to do something great. Because curiosity-driven inquiry is deeply linked to technological innovation, but not in the ways that people who are in companies and want to be drivers of that are thinking, okay? Scientific and technological inquiry is innate to all communities. I just gave you one example of where it happened in our hood, basically, okay? But, for example, I was in Detroit hanging out with a guy named Juan Atkins who invented something called Detroit Techno, which is a $9 billion industry, all right? Except they ain't tasting the money. I wonder about that, all right? There's great opportunity for those that are traditionally overlooked, okay? And this is, so in other words, you know, the best way, one of the best ways to deal with your competitors is to be underestimated by them. So what I want to talk about a little bit about this legacy of innovation, what I mean by this. What we're looking at here is a diagram that John Coltrane hand-drawn. He gave it to Yusuf Lateef in 1961 as a birthday present. And you might want to look at that, and it would make no sense to actually show this to music composers. Actually, it was a big part of my book was decoding that in terms of Einstein's theory of invariance. It turns out that Coltrane was also not just a person that was making, you know, blowing notes on his horn. He was a scientist. He was studying Einstein's theory of relativity and wanted to understand, you know, how sound is manipulated in space and time. So I'm arguing here that Coltrane actually was ahead of his time, and the medium that he was using was music, and he was so ahead of his time that now my colleagues, I've been working for the last 4 years with colleagues at Caltech, NYU, Dartmouth College, and Brown, where we are developing artificial intelligence to expand this into 4 dimensions. So this is not a joke. What we're looking at here is right up the street at Minton's Playhouse, when the swing musicians who were playing swing music in Manhattan did not just want to be seen as entertainers, went uptown, right down the street on 120, wait, this is 125th Street, at Minton's Playhouse, to, ready for this? To experiment. To experiment because they wanted their music to be art. But it turns out that it was more of a science because they were also experimenting, making mistakes, and those mistakes led to new innovations. That innovation was called bebop jazz. The bebop scale, okay, if you get into like dropping bombs, right? All of these innovations. And if you look cognitively at those innovations and how they happen, it's very similar to how I, as a theoretical physicist, actually engage in research. I've so far graduated 8 PhD students, they're all doing pretty well, and I trained them in this type of what I call improvisational logic. And I did not learn that only from my physics teachers, I learned it from studying other jazz musicians. So now I want to introduce to you a concept, what I call, that is nothing new. I've just built it from what I've learned from my predecessors, from this legacy right here in Harlem. And I call it radical creativity. And it also is extension of, I would call my, when Albert Einstein came up with relativity, his work was denounced as Jewish science by the Germans, right? And he was asked, how did you come up with the theory of relativity? If you study theory of relativity, you would think that, oh, it's this crazy mathematics, differential geometry. You would think that this has to do with logical thinking, or like, this type of thinking that a lot of us associate the hard sciences with. Einstein's answer was, my discoveries came from the free invention of the human mind. That's how we came up with relativity. If you tell a young person in a physics class that, by the way, this logical way of thinking is subservient to the high-level stuff, which is how Albert Einstein does it, or how John Coltrane does it, or how Rakim does it, the free inventions of the human mind, right? It is something we are all endowed with. So what is this? What are some of the tenets of radical creativity? Well, when people or groups from different disciplines, we call it different silos, walks of life, explore together, innovation is catalyzed. So a good example of this was what we call hip-hop culture, the Zulu nation, right? Where you had different groups. You have people from the Latin American countries, from Brazil, from the Caribbean, African Americans, Irish cats as well. They came together and they creolized an art form. And something new came out of that. Happened right there in the Bronx. It didn't happen anywhere else because the conditions of that creolization took place, and it happened organically. But the challenge I have for us here is, how do we jump out of our silos? How do we jump out of our comfort zones and get uncomfortable? All right? Another tenet is when an outsider brings an outsider perspective on a new problem on the inside. So, for example, the Nobel Prize in superconductivity, actually, Professor Schwartz's PhD advisor, Leon Cooper, was a perfect example of this. High-speed circuitries and cell phone towers and levitating trains came from this invention. And Leon solved superconductivity in the 50s because he was an outsider. He was a particle physicist working in solid-state physics. So he had a different perspective on the problem that even Einstein himself and Richard Feynman could not solve. He was an outsider on the inside. You're going to have, so that, I'll expand on that in a second. And the fourth is, yes, jumping out of your comfort zone. I just flew back. I was at a conference also in Greece with all these European leaders. I was the only black person there, and I felt very uncomfortable. But I embraced that as, this is an opportunity for me to grow, even though I was uncomfortable. There was a competition in this conference. It's called a Now Assembly. You can Google it. And they had a competition for some statement. And I didn't feel like I was part of the thing, but I wrote this anyway, and that won the competition for the thing, right? I want to end with some, actually, because I think we talked about storytellings. And so everything I told you so far is abstract verse. So let me actually give you some concrete examples of what I mean by that. And the importance of legacy. And the importance that when we engage our young people, it's important that we also pass on the importance of legacy. You can be independent, you can have your own thoughts, but you are built, and to show them also how important that is. So I want to talk about this gentleman. How many of you know who E.E. Just is? How many of you heard about something called epigenetics? Okay, very good. It is now at the forefront of research in genetics. All right, it is at the cutting edge of research in genetics. E.E. Just graduated from Dartmouth College in 1907 at the top of his class, but he was not allowed to march. Okay, and E.E. Just, there's a book called The Black Apollo of Science. He is our Albert Einstein, and in the 30s, he came up with the idea of epigenetics, and he was the laughingstock of the other biologists, including the Nobel laureate, okay, at Princeton. Because at that time, those individuals believed, and they used genetic theory to justify something called eugenics, which is that certain groups of people are genetically inferior to be able to even do biology. It turned out that this is an article written by Malcolm Burns, he's a biologist, and you can just Google this and read the article about E.E. Just. I was the E.E. Just professor at Dartmouth College for 4 years, and building on that legacy, I decided I wanted to build on that legacy. Here's a picture, a couple of years ago, I'm now at Brown, of my E.E. Just cohort. And this is taken about, I don't know, 5 years ago. So I show us just very shortly. The program started off with only 4 students because most of the minority students in my program were scared and they did not want to join the program because they felt that they were going to be, it was sort of like what you call confirmation, no, stereotype threat. They're at Dartmouth College, it's a majority institution, they felt they were going to be judged as being, some kind of affirmative action case. The program grew to have 80 students, right? 60% went on to PhD programs in STEM. We had a Rhodes Scholar in computational neuroscience who started off as a C student his freshman year. MD PhD program, PhD program, 60% of them are PhD programs. That's me in case you don't notice. I was the director of the program. We had students from Appalachia as well. All right? So, and this was built on E.E. Just's legacy. So they all understood this legacy, that they were a part of something bigger than themselves. And that it's not just about them. Now I'm going to combine one tenet with the other tenet. So this is my student Jordan. You can look for him in the picture here. Jordan is here. So here's an interesting story. So one of the things I had the students do, again, we're not doing science the way you normally do it in the classroom. They are asked to cross-pollinate ideas, and they're asked to play with ideas. It's important. Play is important. Make mistake. Say something stupid. Like, you're smart, so you're engaged in that way. Because that's how real scientists, and that's how they really do it, right? So one day, Jordan and Kelsey, another student, Jordan is a computer science major, Kelsey is a psychology major. They go down to New York, right? They come back to Professor Alexander, we went on this Tinder app, we couldn't get a date. I was like, well, I pretend like I didn't know what that was. I was like, oh, Tinder, what's that? He goes, I was like, of course, you guys are nerds like I am. We don't get dates on Tinder. Come on. And he goes, so him and Kelsey started talking about trying to figure out why. And then Kelsey started putting on some psychology ideas to Jordan. And Jordan was saying, oh, maybe let me go and look at the algorithm. So they started to study the algorithm from the lens of psychology of race. And as a result, it led to them building an app together. And this was a newspaper article about that app they built. And that app basically was acquired for, I think, $10 or $20 million while they were in college. And this is an example of what I mean by radical creativity in real life. All right? So I think I'm almost done. Technology is based on inevitable necessities. So now I'm now getting into the future of technology. What are the inevitable necessities that we have? How much time do I have? All right. So I'm speaking real fast because I want to finish in time. I can speak much slower. So let me also give a personal account of my own, how I was able to grow as a scientist. So I'm going to embarrass an old and dear friend and colleague of mine who I knew since sophomore year of college. My dear friend, Mr. Rob Bonner, that guy there. Rob went on, did like multiple degrees at Harvard and whatever, all over the place in law and psychology and education, all this stuff. And he now is managing director of Code Nation. I'm looking forward to learn more about that. But I used to engage in all of this psychology stuff. And Rob used to be saying all this weird stuff about the mind and all this stuff. Like, man, I don't want to hear that gibberish in my mind. All right? And it turned out, Rob, you'll see at the end of my talk that it actually started to seep in a very interesting way. Because the kind of problems I work on now have to do with forms of energy that we can't see, but makes up 90% of the universe, like in front of us, not just out there, but actually in front of us, in empty space. Can we harness this energy? Right? So we don't know what those things are, and we have to start thinking about it through different lenses. So we want to talk a little bit about more, get back to now talking about what are some things we should be thinking about in terms of the future of technology. Well, I think we should look into, when I was walking, I took the Metro North up on the Harlem line there, and I was like, okay, clean energy. Like clean energy and innovative ways, out-of-the-box solutions. What do our young people have to say about ways to deal with that? Because I think that can be very lucrative to others and other places in the world. Entertainment will always drive technology. We know that the gaming industry drives the most powerful parallel processors. VR, I mean, my friend Jaron Lanier, a very good friend of mine, who is one of the pioneers of virtual reality, like we wrote a paper, it was more of a spoof paper, about how advanced aliens will be running VR, but very advanced VR, because they're using the most powerful computers of their time, which is now. And so, for example, music is an environment. Music is always going to be there, and whether it's going to be a tape recorder, you know, basically magnetism is now a thing, to a CD, to a substrate called silicon base, or the mind. So one of the things I've started getting involved in, this is me. This is the Dalai Lama's doctor. He's also a doctor. I mean, that's what I said. But he runs basically the global initiative for the connection between neuroscience and mindfulness. Now you're like, why am I interested in this? Because I told you that we're dealing with other forms of energy out there. And it could be that that other form of energy, that might be related to what's going on in our mind. And you never know where it takes us. But it goes to show you that that is a form of radical creativity. Being willing to be ousted from the club. Saying this insane scientist is hanging out with the Dalai Lama's like doctor. Who is this fool? And the last thing I want to talk about is the role of an unfair advantage. An unfair advantage. What do I mean by the unfair advantage? So, I'll give you an example. Many of my colleagues or competitors, they're very, very good at mathematics. They're very fast. They were that person with the perfect SATs all the way through and summa cum laude at Caltech. How did a kid from the Bronx, DeWitt Clinton High School, struggling to get a negative 200 in the verbal SATs, okay, compete? Well, I'm a musician. I've been playing the sax since I was 12. And I've figured out how to have an unfair advantage. Because it turns out that a lot of that music I've been playing gives me a way of perceiving sound waves in my head. And I've managed to have an unfair advantage over them because they've never done that, and they don't take it seriously. So the question I want to leave you with is, what is your unfair advantage when you step into a new space? Instead of seeing it as something, as a deficiency, you might actually have an unfair advantage. All right? And I'm just basically reiterating in fancy words all these tenets that I spoke about, and I hope that one of them could be useful. And I want to just give you an example of something I wish, one of the reasons why I am so passionate about empowering young people and making sure that I can participate with you all in clearing the way for them, is because it kind of happened to me. I wish, looking back at it. So this is a paper I wrote in 1997 that I was too scared to publish. My PhD advisor found it and sent it to me. And basically, if you buy this, I basically proposed to use artificial intelligence in astrophysics for the first time in history. And if I would have had the resources or people to connect with to recognize that, well, I would be just throwing money at y'all, like this kind of stuff. All right? So I hope, at the very least, you were entertained, and thanks for having me.
How about that? I mean, there's nothing like a smart guy from the Bronx, huh? That's amazing. The boogie down. Who would have thought? No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot of great minds in the Bronx, and we got one here. You know, I wrote a paper about cereal, and it didn't go nowhere, so. He said, what kind was it? That's good. But anyway, we want to thank Stephon for that great presentation. I hope you guys all enjoyed it as much as I did. It made a lot of sense, and we're going to hope to have him back and keep us informed on how things connect, if you will, how things are related, how things come about. And Bruce, you want to have any comments?
I think we need to give him another round of applause. And then hopefully what everyone got from that is when you're thinking about things that aren't necessarily connected, there may be some level of inherent connection in all of that. And that might be how altogether we're going to move this thing forward and achieve our goals.
That's right, bro.
Let's see. Does anyone have a burning question for Stephon Alexander? If you have one, right here. Let's get that one going. Oh God, don't let me fall.
Hi. So my 10-year-old daughter made this big statement and this declaration of, I'm going to be an engineer. And so none of us know what that means, how we can support her. We're all pretty limited with our math skills. She's got all these robots doing really creepy stuff. How do we support her? Because obviously she's amazing, but what do we do and where can we teach her, where can we go as an organization to help get her started, to make sure, she's in 5th grade, by the way, to make sure that she continues that path, even though her support system loves her, but doesn't have much to support her with.
Good question. Let's see. I guess you'll answer.
That's a really, 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 really good question. Now, I would say the first, since you directed the question, she can email me directly, and I can put her in touch with some people. But the other thing too is that we're scattered around. I think it's really important. We all function as role models. Okay. I mean, Mark Kreider, who is a tall Swedish man, was one of my role models, right? Because he was crazy, right? He had crazy ideas. But, it was important that, Jim Gates and I had, people that spoke, acted, looked like me to see that in action, because so many of the forces out there are constantly reinforcing that we can't do this, all right? That's the Just story, and that's why it was important for me to see, wow, this person made an ingenious contribution to science. And he was also interested, he's a poet, and he's an interesting human being. And I think it's important for her to see that. There are brilliant, of course, the first person that comes to mind is Mae Jemison, Dr. Mae Jemison, who was the first woman to dance in space. She was an astronaut, but she was also an engineer from MIT. So Mae Jemison is the first thing that comes to me. But there's some others out there too, many others. That's right.
The question? Okay. Oh, Ms. Rice? Oh, no, sorry.
You actually know my name. I have a question about monetizing our innovations, because almost all of the examples that you've given, they were great. People may know them as the first, but there's no cash behind it. We don't know about patenting. We don't know about copywriting. We don't know about making sure that we own the innovations that we create, even accidentally. So I want to know, maybe this is something for the Silicon Harlem crew, where there's not only a next-gen tech conference, but a next-gen tech finance conference, where there's the finances behind. I can give just one example: music. Almost everybody who's innovated in the music, jazz, hip hop, whatever. No one, even rock and roll, no one saw the money that came after, and none of their names were on any of the music or any of the copyrights or anything like that.
I think that's a question directed at you guys.
I think it makes a lot of sense to have that type of a forum. And we'd like to follow up with you around that. But also I think it's important to understand that as you say that we haven't done those things, we have done those things. We've patented things. If you look at the whole history of African-American inventions, those things were patented. Those things are in the Library of Congress or in a patent index. What he said about the young man who built a dating app that they sold for $10 to $20 million. What the issue is that it's not publicly made known to us. For instance, we have worked closely with a young woman named Camille Ali Brown. Jackson, you've never heard of her? She sold 4 companies to the tune of $1 billion. No one's ever heard of her because the news presents something to us so that what we think is that we haven't done it, but we have done it and we do it all the time. And we've certainly made a lot of money in music from being able to take advantage of those opportunities. But
And I resonate 100%. I want to add to that, though. But one of the things that I have an issue with, and Rob knows I've been complaining about this for many years, is that we need to diversify, like, or reinvest in. So, for example, if I become a billionaire selling hip-hop beats, not that someone has, but I should actually take some of that money and invest in Silicon Harlem. Take that music money and reinvest it elsewhere. Other communities do this, right? You understand what I'm saying? Like, so if you make money in one industry because we have traditionally made money in those industries, we need to reintegrate in other fields.
We're gonna get that last question right over there. That young lady's been very patient with us, and I know her.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
Hi, Professor, thank you so much. Really inspiring. And yeah, I do know these guys. I produced the 2017 Silicon Harlem Conference. So yeah. So my name's Sarah Yousafzai. I work for an artificial intelligence software company here in town called Data Miner. So first I want to ask the first guest who had asked this question about the young lady in your life. We have women in tech right here in this room. So find us, talk to us, because we're looking for the future of the world. And we're right here in Harlem, right? So, so please find us. But also, Professor, I wanted to ask, this is really poignant because, oh, okay, yes, sure. I wanted to ask about being uncomfortable because you were just in Greece, you said. You were the only black scientist at this conference. And for those of us who have been the first or the only, I'm a material scientist by training, actually. What do you learn from the discomfort that you can share with the rest of us? Thank you.
Good question.
Now you're really making me uncomfortable. This is just to put things in context. This was a conference mainly made up of a third Russian oligarchs, okay, who are funding the sciences, and a handful of hand-chosen European leaders in the science world and the technology space. And so I was one of the few Americans, first of all, there. And first question was like, why do these people have me here to not engage me fully? That was the first question. Like, clearly, and I was also one of 2 physicists there, and like one of the big themes of the 4-day thing was called the new physics. And I was like, oh, you invited me to be the audience so I can hear other people pontificate about their fake ideas in physics. But anyway, to make a long story short, let me say that I think one of the things I did learn from it was the older version of me would pine and figure out, okay, how do I engage people? How do I fit in? There was a part where I actually realized to just sit with it and just like sit down, and just like observe things and let some people come to me. And what I discovered was I found my tribe, that there were, 3 or 4 individuals that came that I engaged with and that mattered, right? And then others started to see that. And they saw what they saw. So that was the first thing. The second thing, it really made me realize that I was part of something bigger, and also an acceptance as to, okay, this is where we're at, and there are things that we have to work on, and we're doing it right here, and this is, I think, what's powerful about it. Your question, and I would like to carry on that conversation with you afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, last question is Art.
I have a question. There's an organization called the 7x24 Exchange. They are the professional development affiliation for people that own and manage data centers, like the Googles and the, Jeff Beheims and so forth. Anyway, I know the executive director. I called him once to see if he would let my son go to one of his seminars or one of the summits that they had. He says, oh, Art, he can go and we'll cover his tuition, and we are trying to find other students. My son's an engineer, graduated from HBCU, North Carolina A&T, and we will let him come on our dime because we are afraid that we're going to run out of talent and expertise that's necessary in this emerging field of the talent that we need in order to supply the necessary skills and the people to run those and operate those data centers. So some of it I think is imperfect information, but I'm not sure if it's all true what he's saying, but he says there's a problem with talent and jobs that are emerging. So want to know what your take on that is.
I think that sentiment is loaded, is BS. And what I mean, actually, let me say what I mean. Oh, we just need more people that are out there. We just can't find them. That's probably that's the correlate of kind of what you're saying. And yet, as my friend said early on, we're out here, right? And what I am saying is that we have, we now are putting out more and more of us, and let's say us, into the tech biosphere, and the same discriminatory hiring practices are still prevalent, right? And so I think it's very important to speak that truth to power. And that's a much more involved, maybe for a future thing to talk about, which is, who gets permission. I'm writing my second book. The title of the second book is called Fear of a Black Universe, Reflections on a Dark, it's about dark matter and dark energy, actually. But actually, it is also about, it is about, for example, I have a chapter called If Basquiat Were a Physicist. And it's about basically who gets permission. The difference between permission to do something is vandalism versus a contribution. So who gets permission to making those decisions, to make the decisions, the hiring decisions, and the structural decisions, and who's at the table is actually very important. Like, so for me, I'll give you an example. At Brown University, in our theoretical physics group, they've been saying for the longest time, so I don't want to, let me not get into too much detail, but in a nutshell, we have yet to graduate an American woman in theoretical physics in the history of our department. And yet there's all this song and dance, and we can't find them. And luckily I was on the admissions committee 2 years ago, and I found one. Very easy to find, actually. So that's, thank you.
Give Stephon a big hand. It's great when you can come out of an event smarter. This guy just made me a little bit smarter. I thought that was impossible. So